Before joining the state team, I was global director at Anheuser-Busch InBev. Was born and raised in Missouri, married and have two awesome children. Next to me is Hannah Swan. Hannah is our OA budget director, also serves as our OA legislative director. And Hannah will be presenting the majority of the budget today, but I also have a few other introductions I'd like to make in the audience. First is Caroline Coulter. She's our OA deputy commissioner and general counsel. We have Stacy Neal, our director of accounting. And everybody knows Dan Hogg, our state budget director. We also have Brian Jansen, our Office of Administration, Facilities, Maintenance, Design, and Construction Director. We have Crystal Wessing, our General Services Director. Julie Littrell, Department of Personnel Director. Stacia Dawson, Purchasing Director. John Laurent, our Chief Information Officer, and along with John, we have Tara Damp, who is our Deputy Chief Information Officer, and a new addition to our team, Tim Marcheski. Tim started about 8 months ago with the Office of Administration. He comes to us from the United States Military, Army, as a matter of fact, and specialized in AI. He is our Director of AI and Data and Innovation. We also have Jeremy Washington, our Director of OA Communications, Paula Peters, Deputy CIO, who is assigned full-time to our Movers project and working with, I don't know if she's in here or not, but Director Hugh, if she's in the room, is also serving as our interim executive director for Movers. Our total budget this year, including Governor's Rec, is about $731 million, which is a $35 million decrease over last year, and it represents roughly 2% of the state's total budget. Our department consists of 1,937 FTE, which is just a couple, I think 3 different from last year. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Hannah.
I can either start with OA or with employee benefits. I don't know if you have a preference. If not, maybe we'll just go through employee benefits really quickly before we get into OA. Employee benefits is the small book. Page 1, there is an overview. Page 2, there's a list of flexibility requests. We're not asking for any new flexibility in that section this year. Page 3 is the first core section. For employee benefits, generally we will consolidate the benefits into one fund before we make the payment. So for each of these, there's a transfer section where we transfer all of the different funding sources that our employees are paid out of into the one fund, and then we make the payment from the payment section. So this first section is where we transfer Social Security and Medicare taxes that get transferred from all the various funds state employees are paid from. Page 8 is the Social Security and Medicare taxes for the Highway Patrol, and then page 13 is the payment section. That's where we actually pay out all of the Medicare and Social Security taxes once they're consolidated into one fund. Page 18 is the retirement transfer section. This works the same way. We transfer a variety of different funding sources into one fund that eventually gets paid to Mosers for employee retirement. Page 25. Page 23. This is additional transfer authority that was requested associated with the contribution rate increase. This funding was not recommended by the governor. Page 25. Yep.
Anything from the governor's office for a reason for that?
I don't know if Dan wants to talk.
This reasoning behind not going to the 32% on that.
Mosher's contribution rate.
So the actuarially required rate is like 27, and so with no increase in general revenue, we are above the 27% rate. So basically, we looked at it like if you're paying your mortgage and you're paying a little bit extra every month to try to get ahead, you do that in the good times, but if you're having some difficult times, you may not do that. You may pull that back. What this would have done is get us ahead and get us to that funded ratio a little quicker, but we are still fully funding the actuarially required rate.
Okay, what rate-wise, what do you think that figure without the 46 million what do you believe that figure is on that funded
As
rate?
for the unfunded ratio, the unfunded amount.
No, the
the
funding
funded
rate
ratio?
on employee salary. Did anybody do any math to say, all right, we think we're at 29%, we think we're at 30%, with not putting this 40 million? Am I not making
No,
myself
it's-
clear enough?
Yeah, no, instead of 32, I think this would, yeah, 30, so it's 30. And the actuary.
It's 31?
30.25 there.
Okay.
And the actuarially required is 27, so we're still.
That's what you,
Yeah, we're still well above that.
30.25 is the rate
The
that you
30
believe we're funding?
Yeah, yeah.
I read that, I just wanted to hear it.
Yes, yes. And like I said, basically, you know, this is sort of like making an extra mortgage payment and trying to get ahead. You know, with the tough budget times, we didn't feel like we could do that, so.
Thank you.
And then page 25 is the retirement system contribution section. This is where we actually make the payment from once all the different funding sources have been consolidated into one fund. And then page 30 was the increase in the payment authority associated with the increase in the contribution rate, and that was also not recommended by the governor. Page 32 is the accelerated contribution section. This is transfer authority that allows the GR portion of the pension payment to be made in July rather than equally throughout the year so that they can invest those funds sooner. Page 37 is the teacher retirement contribution. This pays for a few who are grandfathered into a teacher's retirement. It's a closed plan. There are no new members that are added to this. Page 42 is the deferred comp transfer section. This included transfer authority that allowed the state to make deferred comp matching payments for employees that were contributing at least $25 a month up to a maximum of $75 per month. The governor did not recommend funding in this section. Page 47, this was the transfer for the deferred comp matching payments for the highway patrol. And then page 52 was the deferred comp payment section where those payments were actually made out of. Page 57 is the unemployment benefits section. This is where we pay unemployment benefits for former state employees. And then page 62 is the unemployment benefits section for the highway patrol. Page 67 is the Missouri Consolidated Healthcare Plan transfer section. This is where we consolidate different funding sources into one fund that are paid to MCHCP for medical care insurance for state employees. Page 73 is a increase in MCHCP transfer authority request. This is associated with annual healthcare trend and actuarially projected increases in that plan. The GovRec amount is slightly different. It was updated following open enrollment.
Hannah?
Yep.
I've got a question about that. I want to be reminded where we're at on this current contract and when rebid is going to happen on this contract. I don't remember, and I know I've sat through this enough years, I should have all that memorized, but I don't.
Yeah, I believe we have about a year left on this current contract, and
Okay.
we'll be ready to go out for bid in about a year.
In about a year. So we'll start the bidding process in about a year.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Page 77 is the MCHCP contribution section. This is where we make the actual payment to MCHCP. And then page 83 is the increase in the payment authority associated with the increases in medical care costs that were just mentioned before. Page 87 is the refund deductions withheld and error section. This is just to make sure that we can pay everyone correctly. Page 92 is our voluntary life insurance section. For employees that want to participate, this allows the state to collect money and then pay the voluntary life insurance company. Page 97 is a section that is necessary just to show the IRS we're complying with regulations. Page 102, HR contingency. This is a holding account. It allows us to make sure that employees get paid timely. If there's an issue with funds or allotments or something behind the scenes, we can pay them from this section and then fix it after the fact. It's just to ensure everyone gets paid timely. Page 107 is the workers' compensation section. This is where we make payments for statewide workers' compensation claims. Page 112, we are asking for both a supplemental and a cost to continue in FY27 to address an increase that's needed in the workers' compensation program. They've been seeing increases in medical care costs in that program as well. Page 122 is transfer authority that allows federal and other funds to reimburse GR for their portion of the workers' compensation benefits. And then page 127 is the workers' compensation tax section. And that is employee benefits. We will move to OA book number 1. There is an overview on page 1, a department placemat on page 2 that lists some of the initiatives that we're currently working on. Page 4, there is a financial summary that lists some information about how our department request and governor recommended budget for OA compares to previous years. As Commissioner Zellers mentioned, the governor recommendation did include core reductions in several places. So for the increases that are included on new decision items, there are more than that in offsetting core reductions in our budget this year. Page number 5 is the Commissioner's Office. The Commissioner's Office provides centralized services to OA, including our legal counsel, budget preparation, communications. Page 11 is the Office of Equal Opportunity. They work to ensure there's no discrimination in the executive branch, and they work with assisting minorities, women, and service-disabled veterans with participating in Missouri's procurement opportunities. Page 17 is the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. This is both the PS and the E&E necessary for the contract with the vendor that supports this program.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks. Hannah, do we have any data on the PDMP and results from, and maybe this is just like maybe somebody else needs to come speak to me about this, but I'd love to hear how all of that's played out in the 5 or 6 years since we've had that program. Could you send me somebody, Commissioner?
Yes, we can. So is there any like specifics you have?
Yeah,
Or you
just
looking
an
for-
update on how that program's going and where we're at.
Okay. Yes, sir, we can do that. We'll get together. We do keep data as far as contacts, how many we have in the plan, how many inquiries we have. We also have information on the renewal. We just renewed that contract with, I believe it was Bamboo, just got the contract again. So we have a lot of those stats that we track, and we'll get those to you.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. 5 minutes. It's not. Just would love to hear the results from what's going on there. Thanks.
Yes, sir, we'll do it.
All right, page 23 is the America 250 Missouri Commission section. As many of you are aware, 2026 marks the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. Given that July 1 is going to be right at the beginning of FY27, we're requesting that some of this funding be retained in this core to allow for expenses that happen at the beginning of FY27, although we're expending some funding for the planning and celebration this current fiscal year as well. And then on page 29, there's a new decision item request to allow them to accept funding that has been made available for a celebration at the St. Louis Gateway Arch on the 4th of July. Page 31 is the Division of Accounting section. This is the core funding that supports the Division of Accounting. They provide central payroll processing, financial reporting, vendor payments, oversight of employee benefits, issuance of debts. This section also includes funding for the staffing for the ERP project movers. About 66 of those FTE in the section are with the core Division of Accounting, and the rest are related to the ERP project. Page 38 is a new decision item request for post-implementation staffing for the Movers project. Once we have finance go live, there's going to be staffing needed both for a help desk. There's going to be maintenance and operations associated with the finance module being live. Because the system gets continual updates, those staff are going to be needed to regression test the system. As there's updates needed when it's first launched, if there are maintenance and operations changes that are needed, working with the vendor, those kinds of things. So typically when a system goes live, there's heavy maintenance and operation that's needed early on, especially with assisting the state workforce with training and all of the questions that they'll have up front. And then hopefully over time, the level of need for the maintenance and operations will go down. But while the project is new, we anticipate that it's going to be 10 to 15 staff that are needed for that.
Okay, Ms. Swan, with the discussion, I think I followed all that along. Any impact you think in the upcoming budget year because of the pause being implemented, or it sounds like, I know I have a meeting coming up before long to listen to where we're at on movers, but these positions are with phase 2, with phase 1. Do we need to worry about having them this year? How long the pause? Those are kind of things that I want somebody to be able to talk to me about, okay? Am I wrong that these positions are around the phase 2 part of the program, or am I?
Do you want to come up and say something about that, Paula?
Good morning. My
Good
name's
morning.
Paula Peters,
Yes,
and I am the deputy CIO, but I'm working full-time on movers right now. And so the request for the FTE covers all areas of the project, so it's not just the paused hybrid area. It's also for phase 1, and which was the budget pieces. We have procurement in place. We have statewide learning, different pieces of the project that are in place. And so right now, what's happening is we're trying to cover that with either full-time employees from maybe Dan's group, budget and planning, or we're trying to cover that from people that are on the project team. And so the problem that we're seeing is that in the project team, those were always meant to be temporary positions. So they were meant to be like you work on the project, but then those people have real jobs. They have, other places to go in the state. And so what we're looking to do is start to fill full-time positions that we know will be ongoing support for the Movers program, because right now we're investing a lot of time, money, knowledge in people that will go back to other jobs and not necessarily be there to support the system ongoing. And so we're really thinking that it'd be better for the state for us to start to do that now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it answers the part. When I'm identified this, I was thinking that these people were dedicated to phase 2. And you're saying to me, no, they're not necessarily dedicated to the phase 2 of the project. They're dedicated to the overall Movers project.
To the overall Movers project. Now, a good number of them will be working on ongoing support for the phase 2 pieces, but the way we're looking at putting it together in order to be efficient is not to have them necessarily, some for phase 1, some for phase 2, some for phase 3, or different pieces of the system. We want to cross-train everybody so that they can help in all areas doing the testing, training, things like that.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
thank you.
Page 41 is the core funding for the Division of Budget and Planning. They provide the governor with support in creation of the governor's recommended budget. They provide economic forecast, legislation monitoring, a variety of functions, including forecasting and expenditure control. Page 47, Census Prep State Demographer section. The GovRec position was to move this request from Budget and Planning section to ITSD section, so we'll touch on this one in just a minute when we get to page 59. Page 50 is ITSD Operating Core. This core provides centralized enterprise-wide IT services for all of the agencies that are supported by OA ITSD. This includes all of the hardware, software, licensing, data charges that are overall for the over 1,000 systems that are supported by ITSD. Page 59, as I mentioned just a second ago, Census Prep State Demographer. Funding for the state demographer was cut in the FY25 budget. This is typically a position that we have filled on an ongoing basis. We are needing to have this position filled right now. They coordinate on a number of census projects. They ensure population counts are accurate, that the data that's going to the Census Bureau is accurate. Typically, as we get closer to the next census, we'll be asking for a couple of positions that support this position, but we do need this position to be filled now. Page 62, is the IT Asset Management Fund switch. This was a new decision item that was not recommended by the governor. Page 65 is most spatial data info. There is a corresponding core reduction in ITSD's core section. GIS data is housed for the state by a contract with MU. There was $333,000 of GR and ITSD's core to support housing that GIS data. The governor's recommendation is that the entire cost shouldn't be supported by GR, so this request is to pick some of that cost up with other funds. Page 67 is the ITSD Citizen Portal section. This is the ongoing funding related to the Digital Government Transformation Project that was originally funded by ARPA. There are ongoing costs associated with all of the subscriptions for the platform and everything else that goes with that. That's included in this section. Page 72, statewide customer service. This is also called ShareMo. This was originally approved in FY23. It allows citizens to provide direct feedback about their experience with the state. It provides state agencies with a way to collect real-time data and make changes in their programs based on citizen feedback. Page 77 is key management section. This is funding that was added in FY26 for a centralized key management system. This automates the process of changing encryption keys that allow state systems to talk to each other. This is important both for security and also for regulatory compliance. Page 82 is the DESI IT core. This is funding for all the IT expenditures that are specific to DESI, including their specific IT hardware, software maintenance, software licensing, data charges. Page 89 is the DESI Foundation formula cost to continue. This is a request that was approved last year, but it was changed to one-time funding. Generally for IT projects, it takes us more than 1 year to complete them. Also for some of them, we have ongoing maintenance and operations that'll be needed once the systems are complete. So all of the FY26 IT projects that were approved as one-time funding, we're asking for again in FY27. This is the one to replace the DESI Foundation formula calculation system. That system is old and replacement is critical. Page 92 is the higher education and workforce development IT section. This is all of their specific IT hardware, software, maintenance, etc. Page 97, this is another project that was appropriated last year with one-time funding, requesting it be reappropriated in FY27 to allow higher ed to update their FAMOUS system that's used to administer state student financial aid. Page 100 is the DOR IT core. This is all of the IT expenditures that are specific to the Department of Revenue. Page 105 is the Office of Administration IT core. This is IT expenditure specific to OA. Page 111 is the IT expenditure specific to the Department of Agriculture. Page 116 is the IT core specific to the Department of Natural Resources, all of their IT hardware, software, licensing, etc. Page 122, DNR SRF system cost to continue. This is another one that was approved last year as one-time funding. This is to allow DNR to replace their state revolving fund system, which tracks financial project data for their clean water and drinking water loan grant programs. That system needs to be replaced. Page 125 is the DED IT core. Page 131 is the IT core for the Department of Commerce and Insurance. Page 136 is the IT core for the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations. Page 143 is the IT core for the Department of Public Safety. Page 149, this is another project that was appropriated as one-time funding last year. It's needed in FY27 again to allow the Veterans Commission to replace its electronic health record system. Page 152 is another project that was approved last year with one-time funding. We are requesting it be reappropriated in FY27 to allow the Veterans Commission to replace their outdated resident call system. There will also be ongoing funding needed once this project is complete to cover the ongoing vendor and maintenance support. Page 155 is the IT core for the Department of Corrections. Page 160 is requesting reappropriation of funding that was coded as one-time funding last year for an electronic health record module for the Department of Corrections offender management system.
This system won't roll into mover system, will it always be standalone?
There will be a standalone component needed for Department of Corrections for their offender management system, yes.
Okay, so this one is the standalone. It's not going to be a part of the mover system.
I think the goal is to have updated technology where you can have compatible systems, but this is going to need to be its own system. Page 162 is the Department of Health and Senior Services IT core. And page 168 is the IT core for the Department of Mental Health. Page 173 is the IT core for the Department of Social Services. And then page 179, HR 1, the big beautiful bill, reduced the federal match on SNAP admin from 50 to 25%, which is increasing the state share. This is the increase needed in GR for OAIT associated with the change in the reduction in SNAP admin. Page 182, telecommunications network section. This is the core funding that enables ITSC to provide communication services to all the state agencies, including phone service, long distance, internet access, wireless service, video conferencing, WebEx, all of that. Page 188 is the e-procurement and state technology fund section. Statewide contracts include language that requires a 1% administrative fee. That funding is used to support the MOBI system, and as we have that transition into the new mover system, this is also going to support some of the costs associated with movers. Page 193 is the SAM2 replacement section. This is the core funding where we make vendor payments associated with replacing SAM2, obviously movers. This is going to be a statewide project. The other fund in this section is associated with the EPROC that I just mentioned before, and this is where we're making those payments as we're working on that project. Page 198 is the Enterprise Resource Planning Cost Allocation section. This includes non-count authority that allows costs to be allocated from other funds to support the implementation of movers. This is so that other funds can pay a proportionate share of those costs. Page 203 is the personnel section. The Division of Personnel provides central HR functions for the state. They're responsible for recruitment, retention, the uniform classification pay system. They provide guidance to state agencies on employment laws, performance management, training, and professional development. Page 212 is core funding for the Center of Operational Excellence. Operational excellence is focused on improving state processes, performance, improving efficiencies. They support each one of the state agencies' OpEx leaders to identify areas that we can make improvements in state government. Page 220, this was core funding for an employee referral program. It was originally launched in 2024 to leverage current state employees as a source of recruitment for the state. It provided $250 or $500 for difficult positions to fill for referring non-state candidates into a state job. This funding was not recommended by the governor. Page 225 is analytical data for hiring. This was another relatively new program. It was added in FY24 to allow agencies to better utilize workforce data. This funding was not recommended by the governor. Page 230 is the Mow More program. This is also called the Show Me Challenge. Teams develop pitches for ways to improve how the state operates, and then there's prizes given to winning team members. It's an incentive to employees to share ideas about how we can do things better at the state. Page 235 is the Rewards and Recognition program. This section included funding to reward top performers by covering up to $1,500 for professional development expenses. This was not recommended by the governor. Page 242 is the Division of Purchasing section. This is core funding for the centralized procurement services that are provided to the various state agencies. Page 249 is the Bid and Performance Bond Refund section. During the procurement process, bidders provide the state with a deposit. This authority allows those deposits to be refunded. Page 254 is the Missouri Governor Mansion donation section. This appropriation provides authority to spend donated funds in support of maintenance or renovations or operations at the Missouri Governor's Mansion. It also allows for funding that's associated with public events to be expended for the purpose of supporting those functions that are held at the mansion. Page 259 is the beginning of core funding for facilities management, design, and construction. This is all of the core funding for leasing operations, the real estate unit, facility operations, and the capital improvements program. Basically, this is funding that supports the work that supports all of the maintenance and operation of our leased facilities, state-owned properties, and CI projects. In House Bill 13, all of these new decision items we're about to cover, you'll see those again, because essentially on the House Bill 13 side, they consolidate various funding sources for all of the state-owned properties and all of these projects, and then the actual staff are paid out of that one fund after all of those different funding sources are consolidated. So page 268 is a new decision item associated with new legislation that was passed last session. Senate Bill 68, Get the Lead Out of School Drinking Water Act, requires schools that receive state funding to provide drinking water and lead concentration levels that are below 5 parts per billion. DESE operates 29 state schools. DYS operates 15 schools. FMDC is going to be charged with all of the lead testing schedules, making sure that we're in compliance with that legislation. Any remediation that's needed, retesting and tracking of all of that. So this is funding associated with that. Page 271, SEMA moved to state warehouse. DPS SEMA is requesting to move from a leased warehouse space into state-owned warehouse space. They're needing a little bit of additional space, but most of this cost is associated with build-out for security, badging, and cameras just to get that space ready for them to utilize. Page 274, DYS Datama House relocation. DSS DYS is requesting funding to allow for the relocation of their Datama House. Bryan Properties informed DYS that they would not renew the lease where that program is currently located. They've been willing to extend it through December of 2026, following a substantial rent increase, at which point they're going to have to move to a new location. There will likely need to be renovations wherever they move that program to allow for all of the things that are required for operating a DYS facility. Page 277, janitorial increase. This was a new decision item to address inflation. This item was not recommended by the governor. Page 280, utility increases. This was a request to cover electric, natural gas, and water sewer increases. On the next page, the PSC recently approved rate increases for electric of 13%, natural gas of 13%, and water sewer of 10%. Those have all already gone into effect, so there's a supplemental request associated with this as well. Page 283, DSSGR pickup. This is associated with the change in the funding source on SNAP SNAP admin changing from 50% to 25%. The actual change from Fed to GR you'll see on the House Bill 13 side rather than in House Bill 5. Page 286, Kansas City Behavioral Health Hospital. In 2024, there was funding for a 200-bed mental health hospital in Kansas City. In the spring of 2026, we're going to have the architecture, engineer, and CMR construction packages being developed. FMDC is requesting staff both to oversee and manage that project and be on site for the duration of the project, and then they will also need staff once that project is complete for maintenance and operations at that facility.
I do have a question about that before we go on, and not to be answered now. But I'd like for somebody that is managing that, which I would say state FMDC, these staff members, to come in and 3 minutes or less, tell me what kind of people you're looking for. Out of those 4, what I'm asking you, is there anybody in that 4 that has any idea what goes on in mental health facilities and how to meet the requirements out of CMS and stuff? Or is it somebody like me that's built a shed? You know, what kind of expertise is going to be in that group of 4, so we don't build something and find out we got 500 things wrong with it. Like, I've not seen that in state. My previous time working in schools, 27 buckets to fill the holes for all the stuff that was screwed up. So, want to know 3 minutes who those 4 people are, and I took longer asking the question than I expect the answer to be. Thank you.
Yep, we can do that. Page 290, security professional increase. This is a request to cover increased costs associated with security contracts, FMDC contracts with various security professionals for specific state-owned buildings. We're seeing increases in the cost for those contracts. These are necessary to help mitigate crime and theft and make sure that we keep all of our state team members and members of the public safe when they visit our state office buildings. Page 293. This is a request that is associated with new staff that are being requested in DESI's budget associated with additional monitoring at the Charter Public School Commission. There were 4 staff that were requested in DESI's budget. The governor recommended 2, so the change from the department request to the governor's recommendation is just associated with the staff that are being recommended. This is just for the space that those staff will need. Page 296 was a request for additional space for from a handful of state agencies, DSS, DMH, DNR, DOC. This item was not recommended by the governor. Page 300, Diagnostic Forensic Campus. One of the ARPA projects was the multi-agency lab campus. This is the funding that's going to be needed once that project is complete. We've had requests the last couple of years to bring some staff on as that project moves through the process. This is just the remaining funding that is going to be needed once that project is done. Page 302 is the Attorney General Solicitor Office. They need some additional space in St. Louis for new staff that were approved in their FY26 budget. Page 304 is funding that's being requested to provide parking for visitors to the Fletcher Daniel State Office Building. In October of 2025, FMDC was made aware of structural issues with the parking garage connected to the building that's going to prevent further use of the parking garage. They're looking for an immediate solution for individuals to be able to park there. There will probably also need to be a longer-term solution, but right now they're just looking at leasing some additional parking in that area while a longer-term solution is figured out. And then page 306 is the Treasurer's Office is requesting some additional space in Chesterfield. This will provide them with some additional office space. In House Bill 13, you'll see some costs associated with the build-out. This is just the ongoing cost associated with that space that they're requesting. Page 308 is the Missouri State Capitol Commission section. This appropriation authority allows for grants or donations or gifts to be spent that are made in support of the work of the Missouri State Capitol. And then page 313, this is the authority that allows FMDC to make upfront payments for facility expenses, replacements, or repair costs, and then bill agencies for those via the interagency billing process. And that is OA book number 1. All right, book 2. Page 318 is the core funding for the Division of General Services. They provide a number of essential support services for state agencies. They manage document solutions, which does design, printing, and copy services. They manage central mail, risk management, the legal expense fund, the workers' compensation program, and they also oversee surplus recycling program and the consolidated carpool. Page 326, surplus property recycling. The federal government provides property at no cost to the state other than transportation costs, and then surplus transfers that property to eligible entities such as state agencies, cities, or counties. All of the expenses for this program are recovered through service charges applied to the property, so it is a self-sustaining program. Page 332 is the Fixed Price Vehicle and Equipment Program. This is funding to acquire low mileage vehicles and construction equipment from the federal government to be resold to state agencies and eligible entities at favorable rates. Page 337 is the Surplus Property Recycling Transfer section. By statute, some funding is transferred to the Department of Social Services to be used for their heating assistance program. This appropriation facilitates that transfer. Page 342 is the Surplus Property Proceeds section. This allows proceeds from surplus property sales to cover the costs of conducting those sales, which includes auction fees, advertising, travel expenses. And then there's a transfer in the next section where we transfer the funding for the property back to the funds that originally purchased it. Page 352 is the Property Preservation Fund transfer section. This is an alternative funding mechanism for insuring bonded buildings rather than purchasing insurance. This allows for transfer into the Property Preservation Fund if needed. And then the next section is the payment authority. Again, it's only used if needed, but this is an alternative to purchasing insurance for bonded state-owned properties. Page 362 is the Rebillable Expenses Authority. This allows raw materials that are used in the production of goods and services to state agencies. Document Solutions and Fleet Management use it for paper, parts, fuel, etc., and then they rebill those costs to state agencies. Page 367 is the Legal Expense Fund transfer section. This is appropriation authority that allows for transfers to the state legal expense fund on an as-needed basis for the payment of claims, premiums, and expenses associated with the legal expense fund. Budget and planning works closely with agencies when there are claims to determine what funding source is most appropriate to pay those from. And then page 372, in FY26, there was a $10 million GR increase that was added for payments of claims. However, it was made as one-time funding. That funding is likely going to be needed on an ongoing basis for the foreseeable future, so we're requesting that again in FY27. Page 374. This section was added by the General Assembly in 2018. It's $1, but there is 3% flexibility that was added into the budget bill from a variety of GR appropriations to allow for those to be flexed to the legal expense fund if needed to make sure that we can make our legal expense fund payments. And then page 379, this is the authority where the actual legal expense fund payments are made from. Page 384 is the Administrative Hearing Commission section. The Administrative Hearing Commission provides neutral and independent hearing officers who conduct hearings and write decisions in disputes between state agencies and commissions or businesses. They have authority in hundreds of areas, including income, sales tax, withholding, tax, discipline, and professional licenses, medical marijuana, Medicaid provider disputes, etc. They open on average approximately 2,000 cases a year. Page 391, the governor recommended a decrease in their core general revenue, so this request is to allow some other funds in their budget to pick up some of that cost. Page 393, core funding for the Office of Child Advocate. They review the decisions or actions made by the Department of Social Services Children's Division. They review foster care cases, unsubstantiated hotline investigations. They mediate between parents and schools regarding abuse allegations. They review child fatalities when there's a history of child abuse, etc. Page 399 is the Children's Trust Fund section. They work to prevent child abuse and neglect through grant distribution, public education, awareness, and training. They receive private revenue from fees that are on dedicated marriage licenses and vital records. They also get voluntary contributions. And also there are specialty CTF license, prevent child abuse license plates. They have a variety of sources there that they are funded through. On page 406, Children's Trust Fund in lieu of services. This request was originally made in last year's budget. The idea is they're working with Mo Health Net and the managed care companies to be more proactive in the way we provide home visiting services to high-risk Medicaid-eligible populations, to offer services to high-risk women when they go to see a doctor. Children's Trust Fund will bill Medicaid and then pass the funding through to the home visiting organizations who aren't in a position to have the expertise for billing Medicaid. That project is actually getting close to launching, and so on page 412, they're requesting some additional federal authority now that they're getting closer to launching. They have a slightly better idea how much federal authority they think that they will need. This request is to allow them to serve an estimated 1,500 women and babies. Page 415 is the Children's Trust Fund Program Distribution section. This is the authority that allows the Children's Trust Fund to distribute grant funding to community-based interventions that strengthen families and decrease risk factors associated with abuse. Page 420 is community-based grant section. This is additional GR funding that was added in FY23 to allow the Children's Trust Fund to provide additional community-based grants aimed at preventing child sexual abuse. Page 426 is Children's Trust Fund Child Care Planning. These funds are specific to supporting families' access to quality child care and education with priority given to small communities. Page 431 is the Children's Trust Fund Child Care Exchange. This is funding that was added in FY26, designed to make child care more affordable for eligible families. Page 436 is the Children's Trust Fund Home Visiting section. This was transferred in from DESE. This allows for in-home services designed to support families who have histories of abuse or neglect or trauma, and to provide free and voluntary services to families that are at the highest need. And then page 442 is the Regional Collective Impact Hub section. This was some additional funding that was aimed at specific areas of the state. This funding was added in FY24. It was not recommended by the governor. Page 448 is the Governor's Council on Disability section. Governor's Council on Disability provides leadership, education, and assistance to persons with disabilities through a variety of services. Page 455 is the Missouri Public Entity Risk Management Fund section. MOPERM provides property liability coverage for a variety of public entities through a risk sharing pool. They cover public entities throughout the state, such as school districts, county governments, road districts, ambulance districts, and all the claims are covered by member premiums. MOPERM invests the funds and then uses that fund to cover all of the state staffing costs. Page 461, in FY26, they had some funding that was E&E in their budget that they would prefer to be utilized as PS. They're expecting a number of retirement payouts in the near future, and they want to make sure that they can cover all of that if needed. Page 463 is the Missouri Ethics Commission section. This is the core funding that supports the Missouri Ethics Commission and all of their staffing that's needed to meet their statutory duties and responsibilities. These include the Personal Financial Disclosure Program, the lobbyist reports, campaign finance, lobbyist registration, investigates of conflict of interest allegations, audits, and investigations of complaints. Page 470, that takes us to the Board of Public Buildings Debt Service section. This is the core request for the payment and principal of interest on outstanding Board of Public Building bonds. The debt service amounts vary based on the interest rates of the bonds. This request includes a core reduction of $4.7 million. Page 475 is the annual fees and arbitrage section. This covers all of the fees and costs that we pay to our banks that pay our bondholders. Page 480 is the lease purchase debt payment section. This is for payment on debt service expenses for the leasehold revenue bonds that were issued in 2005 and 2006 for the purchase of 2 buildings in St. Louis. These bonds will mature in 2030. This section includes a core reduction of $2,100. Page 485 is the Historical Society project bonds. This is for payment in principal on outstanding Missouri Development Finance Board historical bonds. These will mature in 2035. This section includes a core reduction of $5,625. Page 490 is the Fulton State Hospital Bond Fund transfer. This provides the transfer for payment on Fulton State Hospital bond debt service. The funds are transferred into the debt service fund 1 year in advance of the required payment. This includes a core reduction of $3,425. And then page 495 is where we actually make the Fulton State Hospital bond payments from. Page 500 is State Fair bond debt service payments. This is funding that was added in FY26 for paying debt service on bonds associated with Missouri State Fair projects. The amount that is included in this section represents a 20-year duration on $55 million in bonded debt service. Page 505. In FY26, the TAFP budget included $4,199,999 from general revenue and $1 from the State Fair Building Revolving Fund for making debt service payments. The governor recommendation restores that $1 from general revenue.
Excuse me, wasn't ready to speak. I think we talked about this a little bit during supplemental. I'm looking at you, Stacy. I think I want you to come by and tell me, somebody said something was written up wrong or something with those. I'd like to hear what that is, and in my office is fine.
We will do
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Yep. Page 507 is the debt management section. This allows for the hiring of bond counsel to help manage the state's outstanding debt. They run scenarios to see if we can refinance or save the state money. This section's funding can also be used to hire legal counsel if we need help with audits. Page 512, Convention Sports Bartle Hall. This is funding, core funding for the state's contribution to the Bartle Hall Convention Center in Kansas City. The state, since 1991, has been contributing $2 million annually. Page 517 is Convention Sports Jackson County. This is funding for the state's contribution to Kauffman Arrowhead Sports Stadium. Since 1991, the state has been contributing $3 million annually. Page 552 is the State Road Fund I-70 transfer. In FY24, $1.4 billion was transferred from general revenue to the OA I-70 project fund for I-70 improvements. This section allows OA to transfer funding to MoDOT as that project progresses. Page 527, State Road Fund I-44 transfer. In FY25, $213.75 million was transferred from GR to the I-44 expansion planning fund. This section allows OA to transfer fund to MoDOTs as that project progresses. Page 532, this section included one-time funding that was added for the FIFA World Cup. Page 537, this section included one-time funding that was added for the Sheriff's Association. Page 342, CMIA and other federal payments. This is a calculation that's done every December. This is a requirement of the federal government that we enter into an agreement where we pay interest back to the federal government for any funding between the time when funds were deposited into a state fund and the time they're actually paid out. We do a calculation to figure out what that amount was, and we pay it back to the feds. Calculation done in December, and the payment is usually made every spring. Page 547, GR cash flow loans transfer. There are some large monthly GR payments, such as Medicaid and school payments. This transfer allows the state to borrow from the budget reserve fund for short-term cash flow purposes, and then we pay back anything that was borrowed between July and May 1st by May 15th as required by the Constitution. That is required to be paid back with interest by May 15th. Page 552 is the section where we would repay anything that was borrowed from the budget reserve fund, and then page 557 is where we would pay any interest that was owed to the budget reserve fund. Page 562, this section included one-time funding to transfer GR to the budget stabilization fund in FY26. Page 567, budget reserve required transfer. This is transfer authority to ensure that the budget reserve fund maintains the 7.5% of net general revenue collections from the previous fiscal year, as required by the Constitution. If the ending balance in the budget reserve fund is higher than 7.5%, then we transfer it back to general revenue. So on page 572, there is a request that will allow us to transfer some funding back from the budget reserve fund to general revenue to maintain that required 7.5%. Page 575, fund corrections. If there are fund corrections needed that take place across fiscal years, this allows us to make those corrections. Page 580, Central Services Cost Allocation Plan. This allows for the recovery of overhead costs to allow various state agencies' funds to cover those. This ensures that the various state funds pay proportionate shares of overhead costs. And then page 594, Budget and Planning does a calculation for the statewide cost allocation plan. Based on that calculation, they've determined that we need an additional $260,803 in additional other authority in FY27. Page 596, this appropriation covers some statewide dues payments. Historically, this has covered National Governors Association dues and Education Commission of the States dues. Page 601, pass-through payment for flood control leases. This is a pass-through payment in lieu of taxes from federally acquired lands. The Division of Accounting passes those payments through to the counties that benefit their public schools and roads in that county. Page 607 is another pass-through payment section where we distribute funding to counties that have national forests or mining occurs in their county. Page 612, prosecution crimes and correctional institutional cases. This reimburses counties for prosecuting any crimes that occur in state prisons. The amount needed here varies based on the number of crimes and prosecutions that take place. Page 617 is the Regional Planning Commission section. This is grant funding for the regional planning commissions located throughout the state. Page 622 included one-time funding for elected official transition. Page 627 is a new decision item request associated with the state auditor transition that will take place in FY27. And that is the end of OA Book 2. Yeah, you can change places with Brian. Okay, and that takes us to statewide real estate. And joining me is Brian Jansen, who's the director of FMDC. Books that we're about to go through are all associated with projects in space that are managed by FMDC. So if you want to start with statewide real estate. On page 1, there is a summary. It lists the square footage statewide for leased facilities, state-owned facilities, and institutional facilities. It also lists the total rent amounts that are paid for each of those categories. On page 6, there's a fund summary that shows all of the different funds that are paying for space that's being utilized statewide. Page 11 is a summary of all of the leased buildings that's being used by state agencies. Page 25 is a summary of all of the state-owned buildings, space usage by state agency. And then page 33, it lists a breakdown of all the institutional space usage by state agency. Page 35 is the section where we capture funding if it's being utilized by non-state employees in state-owned space. Page 36 starts all of the core forms that lists basically by state agency, everything that was summarized on those previous pages. So I will go ahead and jump to page 335. This first request, there is an offsetting GR core reduction. This new decision item is adding authority back from an other fund. The Office of Public Counsel was funded by general revenue. They're in statute, they have set up the Office of Public Counsel Fund last year. The Office of Public Counsel Fund will be funded through assessments on Missouri's public electric, gas, water, sewer utilities. So this is just to allow the funding from that new fund to be utilized for the support of the Office of Public Counsel space. Page 338, security cost increase. As I mentioned before, all of these House Bill 5 requests for FMDC have a House Bill 13 corresponding section that breaks these out by different funds to allow different agency funds to cover their proportionate shares of these costs. Cost increases, this specific one is associated with the cost increase on security contracts at our state-owned buildings to ensure the safety of all of our team members and members of the public that visit our state office buildings. Page 344 is the SEMA request to move from leased warehouse space to state-owned warehouse space. This will provide them with an additional 30,000 square feet of space. 350,000 of this request is, 325,000 of this request is being requested as one-time funding for security, badging, and setting that space up for them to utilize. Page 347 was associated with the increase in the Mosier's contribution rate that was not recommended by the governor. Page 349 is associated with the increase in the MCHCP contribution. Page 351, diagnostic forensic lab campus. This is associated with the One Health lab moving to completion. FMDC had a couple of requests for authority for this in the past couple of years. Those have been core reduced in this year's budget, and they are requesting it now that they know which agencies are going to be utilizing which space and how much space. They're asking to make sure that all of those are being asked for from the right fund and from the right place. Page 354 is associated with new legislation that was passed in 2025, associated with all of the remediation testing and tracking associated with Senate Bill 68 that gets the lead out of the School Drinking Water Act. Page 357. This is the increase needed to address increases in utilities. As mentioned before, electric, natural gas, and water sewer rate increases have all taken effect of 13, 13, and 10%. Page 360 is associated with additional space requests that were not recommended by the governor. Page 363, the Attorney General's office has requested additional space in St. Louis for staff that were approved in their FY26 budget. Again, the majority of this request is one-time funding to build that space out. The ongoing request is for 5,000 square feet at 14 a square foot, so the ongoing piece is only 70,000. Most of this is just build out that will be one time. And then page 366 is increased space needs for the state auditor's office, state treasurer's office. This is funding for an additional 1,750 square feet of space. The total square foot cost is $24,500. Page 368 is the DYS Datama House relocation. Again, 800,000 of this request is just one time for the build out. This is associated with needing to relocate the DYS facility that is currently no longer going to be able to stay in their current location. Page 371 is additional general revenue that's needed to offset the reduction in the federal match rate on SNAP admin. That's being reduced from 50 to 25%. Page 374, this is the corresponding increase in House Bill 5, as mentioned before, for the Kansas City Behavioral Health Hospital. Page 377 is additional space that's being requested by DESE, associated with a couple of FTE that are being requested in their budget. Page 380, during the 2025 legislative session, the Department of Mental Health Their state-owned institutional facility costs were switched from general revenue to DMH's federal funds. Those federal funds are fully obligated in House Bill 10, and they're requesting those to be picked up with general revenue. This item was not recommended by the governor. And then page 383, again, Fletcher Daniels parking garage. This is to allow the state to lease spaces associated with no longer being able to utilize a portion of the Fletcher Daniels parking garage while we figure out a solution. That is statewide real estate. House Bill 17, these are all reappropriations for projects that were appropriated in a prior fiscal year. The way this book is organized, there's a summary page in front that lists each project, and then there are some backup pages that give some additional information, how much has been spent so far, when it was originally appropriated. The first section is for DESI. There are a total of 9 items. The first,
Hannah, just,
Yep.
wait just a second.
Yep.
Give me any highlights that you have on 17, and then I'm going to ask anybody on the committee if they've got any questions about these reappropes at this point. I don't think that, I want the committee to know and people listening in, there are some withholds within these, right?
So there were projects that were added in FY26 that are currently being withheld. By and large, the governor's recommendation was to reappropriate those projects in House Bill 17 to allow them to be expended at some point in the future, assuming general revenue collections come back to a point where they feel comfortable releasing those. Yeah, to your point, there are a lot of projects that are being reappropriated in this House Bill 17 that were appropriated in last year's budget.
Okay. Dollar amount on those withholds? Is that
Oh.
something you have in your head? You don't
I
have
don't.
to.
I would have to ask Dan.
It's
for
on a
that.
sheet of paper up here somewhere on that. So with that, I'm going to see if any of our 2 committee members have any direct questions about anything in this reappropes bill. Everybody understands, if you haven't seen that list, you can find that list of withholds. But unless you have some particular project you want to hear about, we can move on.
Okay. I will say high level, House Bill 18 primarily includes funds from the Facilities Maintenance and Reserve Fund, which is funded through a constitutional transfer from general revenue. That is also currently being withheld, so a lot of the maintenance and repair projects that are in House Bill 18 are actually reappropriations from a prior year for maintenance and repair projects that are needed statewide as well. I can go through this book, or we can do similarly and see if there are questions from the committee. However you would like to proceed with that.
I somewhat feel the same way on this one. I haven't looked over this one as close as I did 17 when we did that.
A large number of these are reappropriations. There are also some new requests as agencies have new maintenance and repair issues that are arising, and they are reprioritizing what their needs are. But this is sort of similar to House
Okay.
Bill 17 in that sense.
So FMDC would state to me then that critical repair things are getting taken care of.
There
Even with
there
the
are a
withholds. Now,
number.
somebody in that building, if it was my building, I may not feel that way. But the roof's not going to fall on top of anybody because of the withhold.
Yeah, go ahead and answer that.
So with all our projects at FMDC, the majority of the projects that we can fund are being funded. Obviously, if it's an emergency, it's being taken care of. With the restrictions last year as well as this year, we are making sure we're spreading our money as thin as possible, making sure the priorities that are getting done as best as we can with the funding we have.
And to clarify that statement, there's a withhold in FY26. On page 31 of House Bill 18 is where the GR transfer to FMRF occurs. It obviously hasn't been determined whether that funding will be withheld again in FY27, although it may be depending on the revenue situation. So that will be conversations that we have to have as we go throughout the year. If there are critical things that occur in FY27, if we don't have funding to address those, we'll have to have those discussions as that happens.
I'm sure there's a page in here that you can point me to that is the savings account for an emergency within a state building. Is that accurate or not
So,
accurate?
so there are appropriations in this budget that allow for
Flexibility.
spending money out for emergent things that take place. However, having cash in that FMRF fund to back up that appropriation authority is basically the conversation that we're having. So if some of that cash that they would expect typically is being withheld, there is still some cash in FMRF right now. But as we get into FY27, if this gets withheld again, then it will be a tighter situation.
Okay. Any questions you want on this book? It's terrible for those of you that want to listen to all of it. I understand it, but I think it'll be my 10th time. And believe it or not, I read through all those leases at one time to see where those were at.
Okay.
Time I won't get back.
And then House Bill 19, capital improvements. This book includes new requests. Some of these, for example, for DNR and for conservation, they typically will have a new request each year to allow for specific federal or other funds that are specific to their department to be expended. So page 1 is DNR section. This section, DNR's requests are to allow specific federal and other funds for state park projects to be covered. That includes real estate transaction costs, state park exhibits. It also allows donated funds to be spent for state park and construction projects. Page 8 is conservation section. This is requesting authority for them to spend Conservation Commission funds for conservation projects. There is a breakdown on the next page of how they anticipate utilizing that funding. Page 10 is the Department of Public Safety section. There are 3 requests from state highway funds to construct a new vehicle maintenance building, to construct a new Troop I headquarters in Rolla, and to replace an Missouri State Highway Patrol interoperability building in Jefferson City. Page 14 is the National Guard section. This is a request to allow the National Guard to accept federal funds that may be available for statewide construction projects. And then page 16 is the Department of Social Services section. This requests additional funding that's needed to move forward with the construction to replace the H building at Camp Avery. That is all of House Bill 19.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dan, we're going to try to look at 20. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And I think your overview's a good start that we've talked about before. And then you know what my question's going to be at the end, so you can decide whether you're going to answer that or whether I get to ask it on the microphone.
I will.
And we'll see whether anybody else that's here have any questions. Thank all of you for being here.
Yes, sir. So for the record, Dan Hogg, State Budget Director. So House Bill 20 is these 6 books, but the spreadsheet here has all the projects. House Bill 20 at this point is basically a reappropriate bill. It is all the ARPA projects, and there are some other fund projects in here also. But the only thing that we changed in this bill is if there was spending on a project, we lowered the amount appropriated by that spending. We didn't add any projects, we didn't change any projects. So this is, again, basically a reappropriation bill. Just to sort of give just a little bit of background on ARPA, because it's been a little while since we've talked about it. This is the federal funds that came down during COVID. These funds have to be spent by the end of calendar year 2026. So it is the end of this year. We have been working with all of these projects to make sure that they understand that. Most of these are we pay on a reimbursement basis. So our department, or our Division of Accounting, has asked that these get all their reimbursements into us by September so that we have a little bit of leeway to get those paid out before the deadline. We also sort of have a backup plan on the ARPA funds because we don't want to, if some of this is not spent, we don't want to send it back to the federal government. So what we did was we put an appropriation in. We have it in this current year, but we've also have it now in FY27, an appropriation that we can spend ARPA money in the K through 12 formula. So if this money is not spent on various projects, right now everybody's telling us they think they're going to spend it, so I don't think this is going to be a substantial amount of money, if any. But if there does happen to be unspent ARPA money, we can then spend that in the K through 12 formula. Now, I will say that will then just reduce the amount of general revenue spent in the K through 12 formula. The same amount will still be funded. This is not changing the SAT or any of that kind of stuff. It will just fund that and save general revenue, which will help us a little bit with our budget situation, although it is one-time money, so it's some help, but not as much help as ongoing would be. But we are doing that as sort of a fail-safe so that we don't have to send any of this money back to the federal government. If there are questions on specific projects in here, probably the easiest thing to do with the chairman's approval is if you want to just ask me offline because, obviously I don't know off the top of my head all of these projects. But if there's specific ones that you're interested in, we are in contact with these as much as we can. I will tell you all of the state projects are on pace to have this money spent. Obviously, a lot of these projects were appropriated to local governments and other entities, which we obviously don't have direct control over, but we have been in contact with them, reminding them that they need to get this money spent by the end of 2026. And in fact, we're asking them to have it spent by September so that we can get all the bills processed.
Listening to you, I thought of something else as well. If I'm one of the entities out there, not state government, that the state has been talking about, which is somebody out of your office or whoever's putting that money out,
Yeah.
do you think it has been stated to me that if you don't get this done by blank time and we don't get the money sent to you, we are not going to backfill that with some other dollars? Or do you think there's a lot of me sitting out there thinking, what the heck? If I don't get that $300,000 spent or $300 spent, I'm going to be able to call state and they're going to backfill that with something else?
No, I think that's a great question, and honestly, it's something I think needs to be said. We have communicated to them that there will be no other state funding coming to complete these projects if they don't get their ARPA funds spent. We have been very clear about that, but I'm happy to say it right now on this microphone.
And I will second it, that's what will happen.
That has been our intent from the get-go. That is what we have communicated. The state will not be coming in with state funds to finish these projects if the ARPA funds aren't able to finish them and aren't able to be spent in the time frame that the federal government has set forth.
Anybody got any questions? Yes.
Just for clarification, so these are negative numbers that are on here, so this is what's not spent yet? Like,
Yeah.
I've got couple projects on here, so,
Yeah, this is the amount not spent. And if there's ones on here you have specific questions about, if you want to let me know offline, I can go check on those and let you know sort of what our latest information from them is.
okay, I'm just kind of surprised on one of mine that I know about it. The project's pretty much complete,
Well, they
but
have-
it looks like most of the money's still here, so.
I mean, it's a reimbursement basis, so they have to send us the bills for us to
Okay,
then pay
it looks
them.
like it was a $3 million project and there's still 2.3 here, so
And
I guess I
certainly-
need to find out about that.
Well, and certainly, if there are projects here in your districts or other places, if you wouldn't mind encouraging them also to send us their bills and get this going. I think hearing it from not just us, but their elected officials might help a little bit also. So we'll take any help we can get on this.
Okay, I'll check on that one because
Okay.
this project's standing. I mean,
Okay.
it looks like it's 99.9% done, but a lot of the money's still sitting
And I
here.
will say these are numbers I think that we pulled in like November because we had to get it ready for the
Okay,
budget.
so we're-
there's
so we're a
obviously-
couple months behind
There's
on-
obviously spending that's going on continuously. I mean, this is just a snapshot in time.
Okay.
But if you want to let me know those projects, I can check on them from my end, and if you want to check on it from your end, maybe we can figure out what's going on.
Okay, the specific one is the Buffalo Police Training Facility.
Okay.
Because it's, like I said, I think it's done.
Okay.
I just want to make sure they haven't dropped the ball to get their money reimbursed, so.
I will see what information we have, and if you want to check with them, that'd be great.
Perfect, thank you.
Senator Fitzwater?
Thank you. Hey, Dan.
Senator?
Do you have anybody that's not responding to you? They're having a hard time, like, getting in touch with them to let them know, hey, your feet are going to be held to the fire here?
I don't know of anybody specifically, but I know there's a lot of small communities in that sometimes, these projects are sort of a big lift for
A lot
them.
going
on. But at this point, the last we checked, everybody said they were going to be finished. Now, at this point, we sort of have to take them for their word. I mean, we don't have enough people to go out and audit out all these projects and stuff. But nothing has been brought to my attention that seems to be an issue. But
Usually these types of things, even the small ones, just take a lot of effort from individual offices. I know we've spent a lot of time in my own office trying to help and go to bat for these organizations. So I just hope that people are responding to you well in the midst of having these
for the
funding
most part, I
opportunities.
think we are. I mean, but like I said, a lot of these are small communities, and they just, they're small, almost part-time governments and stuff, and so to do a project like this takes a little while. And I think, it took a while for this money to start actually getting spent because you had the design and all this other kind of stuff. But now we're starting to see this money actually be spent as we're more into the construction and those kind of
Okay.
things.
Thanks, Dan.
Yes.
No other questions. Anything else, Dan?
Not for me?
Boy, it's pretty successful, wasn't it? We're adjourned.
6-hour hearing in the House? Yes. I'll take them if you don't want them, but if you want them, you can have them.